Imagine stepping off a plane, excited for your vacation, only to be met with cold stares, hostile officials, and a sense that you're not welcome. Now, what if I told you this could happen to you as a Canadian in some surprising places around the world? Welcome to 2024, where your maple leaf passport isn't always a golden ticket. Today, we're counting down the top 10 countries where Canadians might want to think twice before visiting. Buckle up, because number 5 will shock you. Now, before we dive in, remember, this list is based on current diplomatic relations, visa policies, and on-the-ground realities. Always check official travel advisories before planning your trip. Let's get started. Starting from number 10, we have Saudi Arabia. Now, let's clarify. Canadians can visit Saudi Arabia, but the situation is a bit more complicated than it may seem. Diplomatic relations between Canada and Saudi Arabia have been strained since 2018, following a public dispute over human rights issues. The Canadian government criticized Saudi Arabia for the arrest of women's rights activists, which led to a major diplomatic fallout. In response, Saudi Arabia expelled the Canadian ambassador, froze new trade deals, and imposed restrictions on various aspects of the relationship, including visas. While tourist visas are still available to Canadians, especially with Saudi Arabia opening up to global tourism as part of its Vision 2030 initiative, Canadians looking to visit for business, work, or education may face serious challenges. Applications for these types of visas can be delayed, denied, or subjected to much more scrutiny compared to applicants from other countries. Additionally, those seeking long-term residency, such as for employment, often encounter hurdles that make the process cumbersome. On top of that, the political climate remains tense, which could impact future visa policies. So, while you can visit Saudi Arabia as a tourist, Canadians should be aware that these underlying tensions could affect their travel plans, especially for non-tourism purposes. 9. Venezuela. Number 9 brings us to Venezuela, a country that was once a top tourist destination in South America, but has fallen on hard times. The current situation in Venezuela poses significant risks for Canadian travelers, making it a place where you might not feel particularly welcome. The primary concern is the ongoing political and economic crisis. Since 2013, Venezuela has been grappling with hyperinflation, shortages of basic goods, and political instability. This has led to widespread poverty, increased crime rates, and a deterioration of public services, all factors that make travel challenging and potentially dangerous. For Canadians, the economic situation presents unique problems. The value of the Venezuelan bolivar fluctuates wildly, and there's a thriving black market for currency exchange. Using credit cards or accessing cash through ATMs can be nearly impossible, forcing travelers to carry large amounts of cash, which itself is a security risk. Crime is another major concern. Caracas, the capital, consistently ranks among the world's most dangerous cities. Kidnappings, armed robberies, and carjackings are not uncommon, and tourists can be seen as lucrative targets. The Canadian government currently advises against all travel to Venezuela due to these security concerns. 8. Russia. At number 8, we have Russia, a vast country with a rich history and culture that has become increasingly complicated for Canadian travelers. The challenges Canadians face in Russia stem from a combination of political tensions, bureaucratic hurdles, and on-the-ground realities. First and foremost, the visa process for Canadians visiting Russia is notoriously complex and time-consuming. You will need an invitation from a Russian entity, whether it's a tour company, a business, or an individual. The application process involves extensive paperwork, and approval is never guaranteed. This bureaucratic maze can be a significant deterrent for many potential Canadian visitors. Political tensions between Russia and Western countries, including Canada, have escalated in recent years. This has led to increased scrutiny of Western visitors, including Canadians. There have been reports of harassment of foreign tourists by Russian authorities, particularly those from NATO countries. While most visits are trouble-free, the unpredictability can be unsettling for Canadian travelers. Once in Russia, Canadians might find themselves navigating a complex web of regulations. For example, all foreign visitors must register their visa within 7 business days of arrival if staying at a private residence. Failure to do so can result in fines or even deportation. These rules can change without notice, adding another layer of stress to your trip. 7. Iran. Lucky number 7 is Iran, a country with a history stretching back millennia, but one where Canadian travelers might face a chilly reception in 2024. The issues stem from a complex web of geopolitical tensions, cultural differences, and practical travel challenges. The most significant hurdle for Canadians wanting to visit Iran is the state of diplomatic relations between the two countries. Canada severed diplomatic ties with Iran in 2012, closing its embassy in Tehran and expelling Iranian diplomats from Ottawa. This means that Canada has no diplomatic presence in Iran, severely limiting the assistance available to Canadian citizens who might find themselves in trouble. The visa process for Canadians is complicated and uncertain. While Iran has taken steps to ease visa requirements for some nationalities, Canadians still need to go through a lengthy application process. Approval is not guaranteed, and the Iranian government has been known to deny visas to Canadians without explanation. Once in Iran, Canadian travelers face a range of cultural and legal challenges. Islamic law governs all aspects of life in Iran, and visitors are expected to comply with local customs. This includes dress codes, particularly strict for women, prohibitions on alcohol, and restrictions on mixing between unrelated men and women. For Canadians accustomed to more liberal social norms, these rules can be jarring and difficult to navigate. 6. Libya. Halfway through at number 6, we have Libya, a country that has fallen from being a potential tourist destination to a place where Canadians are strongly advised not to travel. The reasons for this are numerous and serious, stemming from ongoing conflict and instability that has plagued the country since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The primary concern for Canadian travelers is the extremely volatile security situation. Libya is effectively divided between rival governments and militias, with frequent outbreaks of violence, including in major cities. The threat of terrorism is high, with groups like ISIS having carried out attacks in the country. Kidnappings of foreigners, including for ransom, have occurred. This unstable environment makes Libya one of the most dangerous countries in the world for travelers. Even if a Canadian traveler were to brave these risks, they would find little support on the ground. Canada closed its embassy in Libya in 2014 due to the security situation, and there has been no restoration of diplomatic presence since. This means that if a Canadian citizen encounters trouble in Libya, there are virtually no consular services available to assist them. 5. Yemen. Now, the shocking number 5, Yemen. This country, located on the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula, is currently one of the most dangerous and unwelcoming places for any traveler, let alone Canadians. The primary reason Yemen ranks so high on our list is the ongoing civil war that has devastated the country since 2014. The conflict has created what the United Nations calls the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with widespread famine, disease outbreaks, and displacement of millions of people. The security situation is extremely volatile, with frequent airstrikes, ground fighting, and terrorist attacks occurring throughout the country. For Canadian travelers, the risks are severe. The Government of Canada has issued its strongest possible travel advisory for Yemen. Avoid all travel. This isn't just a suggestion. It's a stark warning that no part of Yemen is safe for visitors. The threat of kidnapping is high, with several foreigners having been abducted in recent years. Terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, and ISIS, are active in the country and have targeted Westerners. Even if a Canadian were to disregard these warnings, practical travel to Yemen is nearly impossible. The main international airport in Sana'a has been closed to civilian traffic since 2015 due to the conflict. Other airports in the country operate sporadically and are subject to closure at short notice. Land borders with neighboring countries are often closed or extremely dangerous to cross. Canada has no diplomatic presence in Yemen, having suspended operations at its embassy in Sana'a in 2015. This means that if a Canadian citizen were to find themselves in trouble in Yemen, there would be no consular assistance available. The lack of diplomatic presence also means that obtaining a visa to Yemen is virtually impossible for Canadians. 4. Syria. At number 4, we have Syria, a country that has been ravaged by civil war since 2011 and remains one of the most dangerous places in the world, particularly for Western travelers like Canadians. The ongoing conflict in Syria has resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, millions of displaced people, and widespread destruction of infrastructure. The security situation remains extremely volatile, with different parts of the country controlled by various factions, including the Syrian government, opposition groups, and terrorist organizations like ISIS. For Canadian travelers, Syria is effectively off-limits. The Government of Canada's travel advisory for Syria is unequivocal. Avoid all travel. This isn't just a suggestion. It's a clear statement that no part of Syria is safe for visitors. The risks are numerous and severe, including kidnapping, arbitrary detention, exposure to violence from the ongoing conflict, and the threat of terrorist attacks. Even if a Canadian were to attempt to travel to Syria, it would be practically impossible. Regular commercial flights to Syria have been suspended since the start of the conflict. Land borders are often closed or extremely dangerous to cross. Moreover, Canada closed its embassy in Damascus in 2012 and has no diplomatic presence in the country. This means that if a Canadian citizen were to find themselves in trouble in Syria, there would be no consular assistance available. The humanitarian situation in Syria adds another layer of risk for potential travelers. Many areas lack basic services, such as electricity, clean water, and functioning healthcare facilities. The risk of contracting diseases is high, and in case of medical emergency, evacuation would be extremely difficult if not impossible. 3. North Korea. Bronze medal goes to North Korea, officially known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK. This isolated nation presents unique challenges for travelers, and for Canadians, it's a destination that's not just unwelcoming, but potentially dangerous. The primary issue with travel to North Korea is the extremely restrictive and controlled nature of any visit. The North Korean government tightly regulates all aspects of a foreigner's experience in the country. Independent travel is not allowed. All visitors must be part of an organized tour with approved guides. These tours follow carefully scripted itineraries designed to present a specific image of the country, and deviating from the approved schedule is strictly forbidden. For Canadians specifically, there are additional complications. Canada has no diplomatic presence in North Korea, with the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang providing limited consular services to Canadians if needed. However, even this assistance is minimal, and in cases of detention or other serious issues, Canada's ability to help its citizens is severely limited. The risk of detention is a serious concern for Canadian travelers. North Korea has a history of detaining foreign visitors, sometimes for extended periods, over actions that would be considered minor or even innocuous in other countries. This can include taking photos of certain buildings, possessing religious materials, or making statements perceived as critical of the North Korean government or its leaders. The political tension between North Korea and Western nations, including Canada, adds another layer of risk. Canada has imposed sanctions on North Korea and has been critical of its human rights record and nuclear program. This political context means that Canadian travelers might be viewed with additional suspicion by North Korean authorities. 2. South Sudan. Silver goes to South Sudan, the world's newest country, which gained independence in 2011 but has since been mired in conflict and instability. For Canadian travelers, South Sudan presents a host of challenges that make it one of the least welcoming destinations in 2024. The primary concern for any traveler to South Sudan, including Canadians, is the volatile security situation. Since 2013, the country has been embroiled in a civil war that has resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths and displaced millions. While a peace agreement was signed in 2018, violence continues in many parts of the country. Armed groups operate throughout South Sudan, and the threat of sudden outbreaks of conflict is ever present. The Canadian government's travel advisory for South Sudan is unequivocal. Avoid all travel. This isn't just a precaution. It's a reflection of the extreme dangers present in the country. Crimes such as carjackings, shootings, and armed robberies are common, even in the capital city of Juba. The risk of kidnapping is high, with several foreign nationals having been abducted in recent years. Even if a Canadian traveler were to disregard these warnings, practical travel within South Sudan is extremely challenging. The country's infrastructure has been severely damaged by years of conflict. Roads are often impassable, especially during the rainy season. Air travel within the country is limited and can be dangerous due to poor maintenance of aircraft and airports. 1. Central African Republic. And the gold for least welcoming country for Canadians in 2024 goes to the Central African Republic, CAR. This landlocked country in the heart of Africa tops our list due to a perfect storm of security risks, political instability, and lack of infrastructure that make it particularly inhospitable for Canadian travelers. The Central African Republic has been plagued by cycles of violence and political instability since gaining independence from France in 1960. However, the situation has deteriorated significantly since 2012, when a coalition of rebel groups overthrew the government, plunging the country into a state of near-constant conflict. Despite international peacekeeping efforts, large parts of the country remain under the control of various armed groups. For Canadian travelers, the risks in CAR are extreme. The Government of Canada's travel advisory is clear. Avoid all travel. This isn't an exaggeration. It's a reflection of the severe dangers present throughout the country. Violent crime is rampant, including armed robbery, aggravated assault, and carjacking. The threat of kidnapping is high, with several foreign nationals, including aid workers, having been abducted in recent years. Even in the capital city of Bangui, which is relatively more stable, the security situation can change rapidly.